the issue that I think is so important is, imagine a continuum from the perfectly literal to the perfectly metaphorical. And let us say that religions, long-standing religions that have stood the test of time, are very close to the end of the continuum where they are perfectly metaphorical. And that our best cases, the places where we've been most effective at understanding phenomena that we now have a great predictive model of, we're very close to being perfectly literal about. And then most things exist somewhere in between, right? Biology, for example, we do not have a perfectly descriptive model because complexity and because the process of time erasing evidence has caused us to have a much cruder understanding of biology than we do, for example, of chemistry or physics, right? We're earlier in the study of it. You could say the same thing about psychology. But the point is, it is natural for us not to look at the vast amount we don't know and be paralyzed by it. It is natural for us to tell the part of the story that we can tell rigorously in rigorous terms, and to tell what we no longer acknowledge is a metaphorical story to fill in the spaces. Even this happens even in your science textbook. But your science textbook doesn't admit that that's what it's doing.
That's right. That's right.
And
that's
so
right. That was the role that Jung thought dreams played, by the way. That's exactly his theory of dream.
And I would say that what you described as that greater ability to see across larger gaps, the point is the dream apparatus, which I would tell you has to be logically a product of adaptive evolution. It has served our ancestors to have it. It plays this function where it is allowed to violate any rule it wants to explore a possibility. And presumably many of those little explorations land on nothing. And occasionally one of those explorations lands on a transcendent connection that if your waking mind was free to make those connections at all times, you'd be in big trouble.
Okay. So I want to modify my statement about the unreality of God for a moment with regard to what you just said. Okay, so now imagine this. Imagine that the revelation that you've been praying for when you're oriented towards the highest good makes itself manifest. And then let's say it's valid. Okay, so it's the valid issue that becomes of crucial interest here, because if I have a revelation that's valid, that means I can act it out in the world, and it will have the predictive power of the future that you described. It'll be efficacious in the world. You know how you can strike while the iron is hot? That's what you're trying to do in Washington. You think it's the right time. You know how you can aggregate a lot of information. You can have a sense of timing. It's the right thing at the right moment. Okay, so now imagine that speaks of the underlying harmony of being itself, right? And so here's a weird thing that, to add to that initial statement, is that even if God is not real in the way that we just described, the revelations that emerge from that source are deeply real because they speak of the relationship between the individual and the social community and the natural world in a manner that's practically realizable and exactly timed. And so this is, I think, why it's reasonable to think about God in terms beyond the real and the non-real, is because there is that element of non-reality. It's something that you conjure into existence as a consequence of your quest, but it's also the voice of what's truly deepest, because otherwise it would have no purchase in the world. And so, you know, there's an ancient line of Jewish speculation that proposes that God and man are in a sense twins, that they each call the other into being, and in a genuine manner. And I think this mode of conceptualization sheds some light on that in a manner that's, you know, somewhat comprehensible.